really want to warmly thank you at ISNTD and the GSA for organizing this webinar. Cannot tell you how delighted it is to bring this really neglected population to the forefront and well attended. So my role is going to be brief for this webinar. What I'd like to give you is a bit of a historical perspective on the drivers that have led to the hesitancy of treating this age group that has been going on for far too long. And it's always interesting and important, and it helps to have a brief walk down memory lane. And when this disease was initially identified in the mid 1900s, little was known on the transmission. And it really wasn't until the life cycle was discovered in the early 20th century that transmission could start to be stopped, so control programs. And so as what you can see here is that the field was highly driven by parasitologists and also by pathologists, identifying the parasite and the mode of transmission. But it was really when those control programs started getting important that treatment became really paramount in the control of schistosomiasis. Different treatments were tried, and of course, it will be a whole lecture in itself to talk about them. But it was when praziquantel finally made its appearance in the 1980s that it was a pretty game changer. But on the morbidity side, unfortunately, the disease, the understanding of disease was very limited to the egg deposition in the tissues. So the disease at that point was very much the fibrotic disease. Any kind of manifestations that were not fibrosis were deemed asymptomatic. And it wasn't really until the 1990s, even the 2000s, when pediatricians started coming into play, developing systems, morbidity metrics, even infection diagnostics paired with those morbidity metrics to identify anemia, growth retardation, physical fitness, and cognitive studies that clearly link schistosomiasis with pediatric disease. And preschool schistosomiasis was even later on, and the disability associated with it. So at that point, it was clear that schistosomiasis was beyond a fibrotic disease. It was a chronic inflammatory disorder. So there was a lot of things happening before that fibrosis was established in the different organ systems in the body. And the problem had been acknowledged for a while. It's just that it wasn't really trying to find, or people, researchers were not trying to find a solution. And I always like to show this because it really shows that even clinicians at the time were finding a lot of infection in young children. This is from Michael Gelfand from Zimbabwe. And what you can see here in this graph in the two communities that were surveyed is that children under 5 were already having eggs detected, over 50% of them in the population. And of course, they knew they had disease. But again, they didn't think that it was a high-risk group enough for it to be included. Some of those old views were that children were the reservoir of infection. And I think even Marianne mentioned it. Of course, they drive transmission in some ways by shedding eggs in the water. But at the same time, they are harboring disease. And MDA programs only really hit treatment once they come to school age. And again, just shying away from just the fibrotic disease and focusing more on the functional morbidity that affects children and their growth and development is very important to try to see why we need to treat them. So we put all these things together from the historical perspective, analyzing those drivers quite a while ago. It was already 2017, going on 10 years, and also focusing on one of the issues that the field had, particularly in endemic areas, and that is really the link with colonial medicine and colonial science at the time, because the disease was identified in children, in British children, that were advised to be sent home, or they will deteriorate physically and morally, grow up slight, weedy, and delicate with a general feebleness. So even in the mid-19th century, pediatric schistosomiasis was being recognized. So we fast forward, of course, we're in 2025. We've done a lot of work. We know that preschool children are infected, that they have disease. So now how do we treat them? And of course, we know that 40 milligrams per kilo is the recommended dose, but is this enough? We conducted a Ugandan study in 2012, looking at the PK/PD of the two recommended doses by WHO, the 40 versus the 60 milligrams per kilo. And what we found is that neither dose really achieved cure rates that could be deemed as optimal. It wasn't until we modeled the 80 milligrams per kilo dose that individual cure rates reach 85%, which started to be acceptable. And of course, this is the basis of what my colleagues are going to be talking about. We also found that younger children had worse cure rates than their older counterparts. And again, over 10 years ago, we were already writing about the need to expand praziquantel beyond MDA programs. MDA programs need to continue, need to be strengthened, need to do as well as they can do. However, you need to think about alternative treatments to get to the populations that need treatment beyond this MDA. And we also published a clinical staging for schistosomiasis based on those less fibrotic manifestations of the disease and how they could actually be put together in a more community-based or health center approach to the treatment. And I think you will hear it a lot, this coexistence of several formulations, of several approaches to finally achieve a common end, which is to not leave any child untreated.